Welcome to podcast 4. I'm Alan Lewis on Raw Conversation. And as I said, we're going to have a special guest tonight. And I haven't been able to say who it was, but I've been talking to him over the last fortnight or so. And I was lucky to get him on because he's a very busy man. And I want him to introduce himself and tell me who he is. Who are you, my special guest?
My name's Simon, and I'm the director of Bravery and Betrayal, which is the true story of the SAS in Afghanistan.
Simon, I thank you for joining us. It must have been an amazing experience to talk to all the soldiers and the people you talked to over that time, and it would have took a lot of time and emotion to put together.
Yeah, it was very humbling, and not only the soldiers themselves, but amazing also to talk and hear the story of the families that supported them. People like David and Mary McCarthy, who are absolutely incredible, the widows of the men who gave the ultimate sacrifice over in Afghanistan, their children. And that was really humbling. And I think the whole team behind the film were really honoured to be able to allow those people to have their voice.
I think, like you said, the emotions must come from both ways, from behind the camera and then in front of it, and I suppose as the director, you still have to hold your emotions quite strong, because with the directing and holding the team, you're kind of, guiding everyone to just make sure it goes smoothly and that everyone just feels safe, whichever positions they have behind the screen or behind the camera, I should say, or in front of the screen.
Well, luckily, the producer of the film, which is the amazing Emily Davis, she was really the one who dealt with everyone. Didn't matter whether it was Kevin Rudd or guys in the SAS over at Perth or the families, the widows. Emily Davis was the one who actually literally met people at the front door of the studio, made sure that they were ready for the interview, was in the room with them. And she really did that role of making sure that the interviewees did feel safe, did feel comfortable, and were able to say what they felt needed to be said. So the producer of the film, Emily, she really was, an amazing value in this. I simply really just asked questions that we'd all kind of agreed upon beforehand. But, Emily did the hard yards, definitely.
Well, it takes a team to build anything, like a family or a community. It really takes a team. And Simon, what I first normally do, and we'll go through the documentary, and I know you have made other documentaries, but I always like going back to the start and seeing where someone came from. But one of the things I normally do on the start of the podcast, I have Heinz tonight helping me, who's the producer and audio person who helps me out. And I have 3 questions. There's the top, the bottom, and the middle. And I'm going to see if you can choose which one you want. And he's going to actually read it. I'm just wanting to see your thoughts with that question.
Go for it.
You want to? Which one would you like, top, bottom, or middle?
I'll go middle.
Okay.
Okay, for the middle one, the question goes: what's something people often get wrong about you?
People, I think, because they see me in the film, think I've done everything myself, and in reality, it's a really incredible team behind this film. Like I said, it's Emily, but it's also Tracy and Nikki, who work for Wandering Warriors, and we could not have done this tour or this film without them. It's Drew Chilcott, who sadly passed away now, and he was the guy who very first started seeing that there was a need to speak up for Aussie veterans, 7 or so years ago. So people do see the director, but they don't realise there's a really amazing team behind that person.
That's a great answer. So going back to your, your early years, where did you grow up? And, how was your family? Did you have brothers and sisters? How was it in your early years as a child?
Well, my childhood is intrinsic to why this film happened, because I grew up literally either on military bases or in the housing blocks adjacent to military bases, because my dad was in the Navy, but also did some stuff with the Royal Marines over in England. And so, I always grew up in a military environment with the men and women who served, knowing them, they're coming around to the house for barbecues and seeing them as real people, as very incredible humans. And my grandfather was a special forces soldier, a very, very early special forces in World War II with a unit called the Chindits. So his regiment, which was Black Watch, his part of that regiment, was sent to Burma in World War II. And that was after serving in Tobruk. He was one of the rats of Tobruk. And then before that, he was in Crete. And before World War II even started, he was doing what these days would be called counterterrorism.
Okay.
So my grandfather was a pretty incredible human being, but extraordinarily humble too. You would have no idea at all that this person who'd spent 5 months behind Japanese enemy lines was now this quiet, incredibly humane, incredibly compassionate person, that I knew him in his old age.
So
that's a really important part of this film story, because I would be in newsrooms or with media colleagues, and they would be saying the most horrible things about our ADF and about our veterans and service people, and not believing or not understanding that these are good people, these are good men and women, who deserve our consideration. And if they're going to be accused of something, then they deserve the due process that goes with that. And they weren't being given it. So, we began making the film.
That is so true. And again, as you said, you grew up as a child, so you as a son, and you see as well how it is to grow up in that family of having someone in the military, and have that emotions towards your dad and knowing what he does, and your grandfather, and seeing how they truly are at home. People might think and see a story about how they are or what can happen, but they don't know when they go home they're a dad, they're a son, they're a brother, and they're just like everyone else behind the door.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in some ways they're not like everyone else, because not a lot of people go into jobs where there is a chance of dying. There is quite literally a chance of dying, and you do that for no extra amount of pay, compared to what average, but it's average pay,
Yes.
So I think they are extraordinary in many ways, and I think that's why Australia supports and loves its veterans, because they do understand that the men and women who wear the uniform are exemplary people, exemplary Aussies. And one of the things touring the film we've learned to understand is that, it's not only the ADF, but it's the fireys, it's the police, it's the nurses, it's the AMBOs, all of these incredible people who don a uniform and serve their nation and serve their fellow man are incredible. And we should get back to where we once were, which is being incredibly proud of these people and valuing them.
I think at the times we have lost respect through different ways in the media, and that when, I think positions, when we used to call someone Mr., and I have good friends that I'm being friends with, I don't know, over 40 years, and I still call the mum and the dad Mr. and Mrs. I think we've lost the respect of even what we joke around and call a prime minister or a president their first names. And I think we have lost the respect of actually when someone has a position like this, or a soldier or whatever they are, we have lost the respect of allowing them to have that position and respecting what that position stands for.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. One of the things, obviously, we get to meet, we have the great privilege, Horse and I, as we tour this film around Australia. We have the privilege of meeting hundreds of Aussies every week, who come and see the film, and they shake our hand and they have a chat with us. And we always go to the bar afterwards, and, we don't drink because we're on the road, but people sit down, they'll have a beer or whatever it might be. And, they tell us exactly what you're talking about. They say that they miss an Australia where people had respect and they had a common sense. And I think the two things go together. I really do. I think the common sense tells you that someone who does a dangerous job for their nation deserves respect. The two things go hand in hand. And I think the people who disrespect our service people, our men and women in the ADF and emergency services, they've lost the good sense to understand that these people are the only reason we have freedom, the only reason we have prosperity. And because of that, they do deserve the respect and good grace that they should be offered.
I totally agree. And I suppose you can think, if there's someone going to break into your house or you're in the car accident, the first person who comes are these first responders, and we call 000 straight away. But then there's the only other time, there's a load of people who want to bag them or say anything. But the first people we call when we're in help is that 000 or our soldiers to protect our country. And it's just like when we need them, we'll like them, but the rest of the time we discard them as just wrongly.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely, definitely. People do need to keep that in the back of their mind when they start to throw rocks or attack with some kind of bureaucratic aggression. The people who serve our nation, and everyone acknowledges that no organisation, no group of people are perfect. But if you're going to throw rocks at them, do it with due process.
Yeah.
A bit of moderation and sensibility.
And as we move, as you talk about the documentary, and do it with knowing the truth, the old whispers and only hearing what you think's true, and then seeing one report and, thinking it's right. Know the truth, talk to the people who are actually there and what actually happened. And you'll find the truth. Then, just hearing a load of people tell you what they think the truth is, or what they want to, put what they want to kind of have the truth in the media.
I absolutely agree, Alan. And I think this comes down to also how we do pursue truth. And I think if people want to look it up philosophically, there's inductive and deductive reasoning. And one form of reasoning looks to find a truth by actually just collecting and collating data across the board, by casting as wide a net as possible and then following correct procedures and making sure things are credible and legitimate and moving forward, and then allowing the information that's been gathered to tell you what the truth is. I think there's a much more dangerous pursuit of truth where someone says what they think the truth is and then cherry picks data to fit. And that's when you get your witch hunts.
And sometimes people don't like what the truth actually is, because they want to make up what they think sounds better. So the truth gets turned towards their way, what they want others to think is the truth. I was going to ask you a question about your dad. You said he was in the military. When you were young, what values did he teach you when he was in the military and coming home as a father?
Well, military bases were very different back then. And you ask any kid who have had a dad in the military back in the 60s or 70s, and you used to go on base quite a lot. That it wasn't as sort of, I understand now that there's different, the security has to be tighter. But so you go along and you could, hang out with your dad, and the families would go on base for picnics and different things like this. And so you'd see how your father dealt with his colleagues. And my father he'd begun as, enlisted, but he did end up an officer. And I saw how he commanded the men that he was responsible for. And it was always with a great sense of equality and fairness. And that was something that really resonated with me, that he could have, been, up the ladder, middle ranking up the ladder, just a normal officer. Yeah. He could have told them what to do and clicked his fingers and had them do what he demanded, but he never did. He always looked at what the task was and then how to make sure the guys were inherently motivated to achieve that task, and that his men were happy and content with the workplace and the work assigned to them, and that they always understood that everything was fair and even. And I talked to one of his the sailors who was serving for him years ago, only a week or two ago as we were touring the film, and the guy still talked about my father, 45, 50 years down the track with good regard. So, yeah, my dad's sense of fairness and equity were just incredible. And that's mind-blowing because he came from the absolute poorest of working-class backgrounds in Scotland, in a place called Kilmarnock, south of Glasgow. And if you think Glasgow's tough, Kilmarnock makes it look like primary school. And I had an uncle who lost a chunk of his nose in a machete fight, and incredible levels of violence. But within that, the family, especially my grandfather, he worked extraordinarily hard to get the family out of Kilmarnock and out of poverty, and then over to Australia. So very, very thankful for that. But you're talking about a working class place where you did have, and this is no exaggeration, 7 or 8 people living and sleeping in one room, where you still had, stone huts where, as primitive as this sounds, people used an open fire to cook their meals.
Yeah.
So really, to come out of that and then achieve something fantastic and set up a family in Australia and have children who are happy, healthy, and able to pursue their happiness, their goals in life is really an incredible achievement.
And I believe, as they say with generations and that, hard work proves everything. You can grow up and say, I grew up bad, my generation was bad, or my family life was bad. It's all to just making your own decision and taking your own direction, and you got to blame yourself whichever way you go. And as you said, your grandfather worked like that, and your father, and they chose the direction they wanted to go. They didn't look back or where they came from or how hard it was. They were just looking to go forward.
It's very interesting that you say that, because that's definitely been one of my father's mantras in life, to always move forward. And when you come from absolutely less than zero, and your dad's been away at war for, I think it was 8 or 9 years, because he served in combat and conflict before World War II, then in World War II, and then afterwards with what we would call these days peacekeeping missions. So his father, my grandfather, was at war for 7 or 8 years, and had every right in the world to, demand whatever or say that, the world owed him a living. And yet he gave to the world, just an incredible sense of moving forward, to carry his children and his community and his family to a better place, without ever putting his hand out or the victim. So that requires a mind-blowing strength.
Well,
My grandfather carried in his shoulder till the day he died, shrapnel from the skull and the bullet that killed his best mate. So his best mate got shot in the head by a sniper, and the head exploded, and metal and bone went into my grandfather's shoulder that they could never retrieve. So, you think about carrying a dead man's skull, in your physical body, or having seen that or experienced that, and then you wake up the next morning and you think of, what can I do to improve the life of my family? That's phenomenal. There's a lesson in that for all of us.
And seeing that and not wanting to just, the old saying of picking up my bat and ball and wanting to go home, to move on and go forward and keep fighting in a battle. It's not actually taught. You can be taught how to use a weapon, you can be taught how to fight, but to have that courage and that will to be able to see that happen and then go up the next hill and get shot at, that's will and bravery, and that's not taught to anyone. That's within the person.
Yeah, absolutely. But though I do think that sense of, tough optimism, if those two words make sense together, but I think they do. And in the film Bravery and Betrayal, you have Burnsy, who was an officer in the SAS, and he talks about the Battle of Tizak and the SAS soldiers who won that battle.
Yeah.
That was a real battle. They blew apart. The SAS went in on the ground, and for 12 hours or so, they fought a Taliban stronghold that many times outnumbered them, but they won the battle. And when the SAS soldiers came back to the base, Burnsy recounts that they were actually ready to go back into the field again. Of course, there were still commandos out there, and the commandos were fighting incredibly bravely as well. But the SAS who had come back to kind of replenish their stocks and rest, they were ready to go back out at a moment's notice. And that is that tough optimism that you can win the day, you can move forward. And, you know, playing the victim really doesn't benefit anyone, most importantly, oneself, you know.
And excuse me, and you know, I'm hearing in your voice, because this is the first time I've done a what do you want to call it, like a Zoom interview. We're not in the studio, and I can hear the passion in your voice, the stories you've been told by these soldiers, and the feelings that you got went through. You know, that when we talk about, you get a shiver through your body, and I can just hear that in your voice, the respect and the feeling you got for them. Like, you may not have been there beside them, but you have that feeling of, you know, the encouragement they had, the will to do what they did.
Absolutely. They really are incredible people, and as are their wives and children and parents back home. And it is no small thing to say it was an absolute humbling privilege to be in the same room as all of them, the widows, the parents, the officers, the soldiers, and also the Americans. The Americans were there absolutely shoulder to shoulder with our Aussies. You know, and the American pilots that you see in this film, there was never a time where they said it was too dangerous to fly in. If they could fly in to pick our SAS guys up and bring them back to base, or if they could get the SAS guys into a place where they were going to be able to fulfill their mission, the American Army aviation helicopter pilots, they would do that. So, yeah, really, really incredible bunch of people. And like I said, the Aussies, whether it's Weeksy, Mortz, Andy, Burnsy, General Dan, all of these incredible people that you see in the film, or with the Americans, you know, Radley Grubbs or Scott or any of those, Steve, all these amazing warriors, you know. And I think that's what the film's doing. It's making people feel that it's okay to be proud of their own service and to be proud of the brave men and women who offered their life to service for their nation. So it's really become quite a phenomenon, this film.
It has, and I want to get into that film more. Just going back to your dad again, like we'll talk about the documentary about how brave the wives were. Was your mum a strong person too? Because if she would have saw what your dad went through, had children at home, and the wives, they're the other the strength. You know, they when the husbands go to away to war or serve somewhere, they're holding to both positions as the father, the mum, the best friend, the protector of the children. They're holding their own kind of bravery at home themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. My dad was in Vietnam, but he was never in combat or in harm's direct way. They still did an incredible job in the Navy, and it had its own threats, but he wasn't in the jungle, you know, crouched down worrying that someone was going to shoot him or anything. I think if there's any trauma in my father's life, it comes from growing up in working class Scotland in the 1940s and 50s. But to get to my mother's, you know, you're absolutely correct. My mum, you know, my dad would go away for 6 to 9 months at a time, you know, somewhere in the Pacific or somewhere in the Indian Ocean. And back in the 70s and 80s, you might get a telex, if people remember them, a little bit of paper in an envelope.
Yep.
Every few weeks or every few months. And it might only have a few words on it, like "Happy Birthday, Son," or what is very, very simple, because it was very difficult to send communication back then. And yeah, the mums had to do everything. And, you know, you have to say it too. Back then, in the 80s and the 70s, when before they didn't have an ADF, you just had 3 branches of service. And the Navy weren't always that great, you know, unfortunately, in supporting the wives back home. The wives really had to make of it what they could. I believe that's much better now. But yeah, back then it was the wives had double duty of having to be the role of the father, the role of the mother, and in the housing commission homes when things went wrong or whatever it might have been, you know, they had to sort all that up too. So we used to joke, and I still joke to this day, that the military housing commission neighbourhood I grew up in, it was funny because it was just a domino of ongoing divorces. No, not one family that lived in the military housing commission neighbourhood I grew up with. Not one actually. The marriage lasted longer than 12 years.
And
Very restrictive on marriage.
sorry, and sadly, that still happens with the pressure put on families and soldiers when they return and not getting looked after properly, or the wife getting supported proper when the husband, or even the other way around these days when the mum might be away serving somewhere overseas. It still is the same, where then they're not looked after either way, when the person's staying at home or the person going away.
Yeah, and I think I cannot speak to that at all. My experience is from 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth paying attention when the widows and the parents talk about that, during the film. It's definitely a good reason to go and see Bravery and Betrayal and just listen to a first-person testimony of what that's like to be the wife at home. And I think on that note, it's one of the things that we've found that's quite beautiful about the film is that a lot of men go and see the film because military history is very much something that men are usually interested in, and they kind of begrudgingly, the wife and the kids come along, and for the first time, especially if the man has served or the wife has served, but usually the man has served, the wives now understand the stress that the men were under in the field. And you do see the wives hold the men that little bit tighter.
Yes.
But then you also see the husbands thank the wife because they understand what they were doing, holding down the fort at home. And unfortunately, people, this film once more, and it's only because of the strength and the bravery of the people who appear in it. And like I said, the parents, the widows, the kids, and they tell what that was like. And it's heartbreaking, so really, really important messages within this film that literally, it's helping a lot of people. It's enormously cathartic to many who have served this film. And once more, the praise for that belongs with the people brave enough to have got on camera and told their story.
Yeah, and I can't wait to get into more into the documentary. But just a question: where did your passion come from, or coming a director? Because I know you did a couple other ones. It was Outback Cowboy and Weapons of. Is it Weapons or something like that?
Weaponizers or Lock and Load with Ali Ermi, which was a great experience. And I think I've done a fair few docos in my time, and I think first up, there's no money in it anymore, so I definitely have never chosen this path for money. But what it does allow you to do is to tell people's story. And I think it's so important as a society, and we have somehow lost it. We've somehow forgotten the dignity of just your everyday Aussie, your everyday person. Their stories really have been lost, and the pride that they have in their grandparents and their great-grandparents, and you only have to talk to someone who's done Ancestry or something like that, where they now know what their background is, and they're so proud of it, And but there's so many incredible stories. You ask anybody about, if their grandfather served in World War II or their grandmother, and they'll go on for 10 or 20 minutes about the most incredible bravery and commitment and courage and sense of absolute unselfish service to their nation and to an idea of freedom. And so I think there's just a lot of stories out there that have to be told or wanting to be told. And very lucky, in my path of being a documentary maker, I've been able to tell them. And Outback Cowboys is a great example. That's probably about 20, 25 years old now. But that's told the story of the ringers and the stockmen who work in Outback South Australia, and the men and women who work out there, the Jackaroos and Jillaroos. And that was an incredible experience, because these are the people, if you like to eat food and steak, these are the people who are out there working, 12, 16 hours a day on the big cattle ranches in the middle of the desert, and once more, not for a lot of money, so that you can eat great quality food, and all of them have been busted up or hit by a bull or knocked off their motorbikes or whatever. And they get up every morning and they do it, and they do it for the camaraderie of life, working on a ranch. And the skills. They have these incredible skills, whether it's roping a calf or racing a motorbike across the desert or whatever. So the inherent interest in these stories, and then the great satisfaction of having just brought a quiet story, one of the kind of silent majority, one of their stories to the fore. So it really is a vocation that's a blessing and an honor. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, again, I can hear that passion in your voice, and the one thing you said there, I agree with so much. We talk about our food, but first it's got to be growing in the ground. The people who do it need more. They have to have more respect. The people who, we talk about trucks on the road and boats, but if we don't have these ways to move it, no one's going to eat. And
Absolutely.
these are the people who get it to us. We forget it. We might see a truck and think, oh God, you're on the road, you're too much, or in that sense. But this is how we get our foods delivered to us. These people are the most central people in feeding us and allowing us to live.
Absolutely, I agree with that, Alan, and it comes back to my statement earlier, which is what you just said, Alan, is really only common sense.
Yeah.
And somehow over the past few decades, we've lost that. And I think, by telling good stories and simply allowing, it's not the hardest thing in the world, just allowing bloody decent people to tell their story. And, that is a blessing in its own accord, its own process. But it's very, very important. And Australia and the world needs to get back to honouring and respecting these people who allow the rest of us to live,
Exactly. And as we move on and getting to talk about the documentary, that's why I created this podcast. It's a very young podcast, and I sent you an email, and I respect that you answered it so fast. And that's what I have wanted to grow this podcast on, to sit down and have no judgment, sit down and actually talk to people, whoever they are. Like, I've talked to a teacher before this, and I talked to Lisa Newman. I have talked to a young DJ. All these people got stories, and if you sit down and just listen and be able to open up and just allow them to flow, you think, oh my God, there's a story in every single person. And
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I thank you so much for, I know you must be so busy, and for me being, a younger podcast just starting out, it, meant a lot to get your message back, because I, learned a little bit about you and Horse, who will talk about as we talk about the documentary through another podcast I was listening to. Moving on to this documentary, what, like you said, Australians are really embracing. Can you tell us who came to you, or did you go to them, and how did it first start to get put together?
Yeah, well, actually, this all starts with a phone call about 7 years ago by a guy who had been a clearance diver. So a lot of people don't know what that means. It's similar in many ways, though not exactly identical to a Navy SEAL.
Yes.
And within the Australian Navy, and they're combat guys who are also incredibly adept at all aspects of diving. So really amazing guys, the clearance divers, and their community have been a big supporter of this film all the way through. So one of the clearance divers who I'd known for decades, a guy called Drew Chock Chilcott, and he called me up about 7 years ago, and he just said, "Man, things are just..." The exact way he phrased it was bizarre. It was bizarre that our most important, or not most important, but our most elite soldiers were being targeted for strange concepts such as their culture. So they weren't allowed to draw a skull on their guns anymore, or, it was a real bureaucratic torture of them. And Chuck called me up, and this was before any of the allegations or war crimes or reports had come out to a degree. And, we thought, okay, well, let's see what we can do. I've got some small connections in the media. And so we started getting a few newspaper articles, and we really have to thank Charles Miranda, who used to be a defense journalist, and he was able to listen to the guys as well. and get their story out. But it was only newspaper articles. We hadn't really broke through. And what we decided to do was create a film, because with 90 minutes, you can tell a story. And we sketched out basically, or the guys were like, well, how would you do that? How would you put a doco together? How would you put a film together? And I kind of discussed an arc or a narrative, which is what the film became, quite strangely, which was make sure that the young people, like under 30s, know what the SAS are, have a little bit of understanding of where the war on terror came from, because that's 25 years ago now, and then touch on Iraq, touch on Afghanistan, so they've got an idea about it. But then within those stories and those battles, be a very, very human insight into what it takes to be an elite soldier, a special forces soldier, and also what it means to be the families back home and what it means to lose somebody. And so we covered that, and that would have been an incredible documentary of its own, because very, very rarely do special forces warriors choose to talk or can talk. And then obviously we had to deal with the betrayal. And that's their word. That is the word that the soldiers, the SAS, and many other people have chosen to describe their experience. And when you see the film, you'll really understand just how painful that betrayal's been and why they use the word betrayal for how they've been treated. And the last half hour or so of the film is that. So Choc rang me up, connected me with a couple of people, two of whom were enormously important, which is Clay and Horse. And they kind of met. Horse and I got to know each other over beers, so we were mates. And Clay also was always incredibly honest about his experience too. Clay's also SAS. And then slowly it started to grow. And then a guy called Andy, he came into the picture, and he was very, very capable at having the kind of paper trail of where things had gone wrong. And Andy has actually spoken in the Senate at Senate estimates about some of the issues facing special forces and the ADF. And then it just kept on growing. Guys like Weeksy, Burnsy, Steve, Mortz, they came in with full support for the film. And we got to a point where we were able to make it. And we kicked off with production with a guy called Dr. Todd Hutchinson over in Perth. And he allowed us to film at his studio for free. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it. Erin Milan, she, through her show, reached out to people and said, hey, donate to this film. It's a good cause. So we got together a budget that is actually around about an eighth of what a normal documentary budget would be. It was a microscopic budget, but we made it work, you know, and a big part of that is due to Emily. And then obviously Wandering Warriors, the charity, came on board to auspice it. And then you get, you know, Masso, who's the CEO of Wandering Warriors, Brett Sangster, amazing people, all ex-Special Forces coming in to realise it was vital that the Special Forces had their say, and it needed to be said. And then obviously you have Nikki and Tracy from Misfit Branding coming in, you know, to work as well. And one of the big things was that this very simple line got repeated to me again and again and again. I don't want my kids or my grandkids 50 years from now typing into Google, what did the Australian SAS do during the war on terror? And all they get are unfounded allegations of war crimes. And again, that motivated the guys. We cannot, our legacy cannot be unfounded accusations. It must also be of the bravery and the sacrifice. Yes. And so that's where the film started, that the film happened. And like I said, you know, with Burnsy absolutely vital in sort of making it happen, as well as Masso and Nikki and Tracy doing a great job, and Emily Davis as the producer, you know, and Emily literally did, you know, a lot of these film and TV things, you watch the credits and there's 50 or 60 names and there's all these different types of people there. Emily literally did the job of, I would say, 8 to 12 people. Absolutely incredible, you know, and her normal job, she's a horticulturalist. She just put a very good mind, a very good ability to organise and arrange things, and a small business, you know, typical Aussie tradie, just bloody gets the job done. And so that was Emily Davis's contribution, and it was just outstanding. And then within Wandering Warriors, which is the charity that looks after special forces. You had Tracy and Nikki Korth, and once again, just bloody good, hard workers who didn't know anything about film promotion or distribution or production, and they stepped into the breach. They learn on the job, and they've delivered a film which we just, it's been in cinemas now for 7 months. It's sold out 60 plus venues, and I mean sold out to standing room only. It's been around Australia twice. There's some cinemas like Brisbane and Perth, Palace cinemas. Palace have been fantastic helping us out. And it's sold every time we put it on there, it sells out. But at the guts of it are just really good bloody Aussies, who stepped in and said, we can work out how to make this happen. And they did, So the film is not only an incredible story about the people on screen, but it just goes to show you that kind of basic practicality, that good common sense that if you really want to do something, you can do it.
Well, one thing I want to say to you thanks all them people and the soldiers and the other editors and other people work for you. But I want to say thank you to you, because you stepped up too. You could have, decided it was too hard. So I want to say, from me to you, I want to say thank you for putting that story out there and, standing up for all these people. And you should, it's not easy to acknowledge yourself, because we're always the worst critics of ourselves. But I want to say thank you to you for doing it as well.
No worries. I appreciate that, Alan. Thank you.
As I said, this will get a little bit to one of the things what drew me in. As I said, I was listening to So We Catch Killers, and there was a horse on there, and he was talking about his dog, and of course some of the documentary about all the special forces dogs. And I have a seeing eye dog, and the way he talked about his dog and what the dog meant to him, each feeling put the exact feeling through my body. Me and Apollo aren't going to war, but the trust I have in him to walk me to A to B, to take me near busy roads, and each time we step outside, it can be a risk. No, not near the risk he was, but that feeling, the connection I have with Apollo, I could feel that. I think his dog at the moment called Spike, and the other dogs he has, that connection is, it's too hard to explain. It's just a connection. Yeah. No one, as you see, I'm finding it hard to put it in words, because it's too hard to put it in words. If that makes sense to you.
No, it absolutely does, Alan. And I think it is, you would be one of the few people, and other blind people too, who just rely so completely upon their dogs. And I think they would have some understanding of how important it was for Horse, who introduced the canine capability to special forces in the Australian military, in Afghanistan. So absolutely incredible thing Horse achieved. But I think you are quite justified in being able to say you understand that someone going into a combat zone whose life depends on their dog being able to, pick up on little cues that something's not right here, whether it might be a buried mine or it might be a hidden insurgent. And you can understand that, because every time you leave your house with Apollo, similar challenges, because it is for you. That dog's got your life in its care. So, yeah, really, really amazing. And I'm glad that part of the story touched you. And I think it was really important that Horse, did get thanked and acknowledged for what he did, because those dogs, as Horse and the other guys say, those dogs saved lives.
Well, I think he is, but I think he deserves even more knowledge for what he's done. To like you said, is the betrayal part for all these soldiers. They all have sacrificed something, and they're still working hard, as you said, to, you type into Google and all you're seeing in bad things. And, I heard the Horse's story, and I have talked to you that we might announce that if he gets time, he'll come on here, and that'd be amazing to meet him and have a talk to him. And like I said, just have the connection about the love we have for our dogs, and the connection we have with our dogs is just a small connection So if that happens, that'd be great. With the families, I suppose you grew a connection with the partners as well as and the children and wives who lost their loved ones overseas as well.
Yeah, it's extraordinarily humbling, and you realise that all you are as a filmmaker is someone who has the privilege to allow people who really need to have their story told. And I bump into family members at the different screenings, and when they shake your hand and say thank you, that's everything. That's absolutely everything. And I do have to say a particular thanks to David and Mary McCarthy. Now, their son was blown up, and there's no gentle way to say it. He was ripped apart by an IED, and Horse bravely tried to save Sean McCarthy's life. Now, that's the worst thing that can happen to a parent. Worst thing, And yet, David and Mary McCarthy, interestingly, David was working in the Middle East as an engineer. And after his son's death, they didn't retreat back to Australia. David and Mary McCarthy stayed in the Gulf, in the UAE, and they would go and attend the ramp ceremonies for the other 30 or so Aussie soldiers who died in Afghanistan. So over 30 times, David and Mary McCarthy went to the ramp ceremonies where the dead soldier's coffin is placed inside the plane to be flown to Australia. And David and Mary went there. And they did that so the parents back in Australia knew that there was an Aussie parent there caring for their son.
And that's
what that involves emotionally. Your own son's been blown apart and killed. You go back into that nation where your son was killed and you do it so a mum and dad in Australia know. Just incredible. I don't know why, and I'll speak honestly here, Alan. I do not know why Alan. I do not know why David and Mary McCarthy have not gotten a gong for being Australian of the Year.
Well,
think about what they've done, think about what they've lost, and think about what they've given Australia. They should be absolutely co-Australians of the Year without a blink, without a shadow of a doubt, or at least OAMs or whatever they give people who bloody sacrifice everything, David and Mary McCarthy, I can't speak highly enough. And when you see the film, when people go and watch the film and they see the incredible humanity and strength of this everyday Aussie couple, these retirees, and you think, my God, I'm proud to be an Aussie.
Yeah, and what you just said there is so true. People could name, so many sports heroes, and they're important, but you could name them off your head. But these people should be named off too. Hear their last name, go, I know who they are. What a brilliant couple. And it's sad that we don't have that opportunity to hear that. And like you said, that awful incident, what happened with Horse being there, and that it just didn't affect the parents. It would have affected Horse. It affected the other soldiers around there. It's just not one effect. It's a dominoes effect from there.
Yeah, absolutely. But once again, it was in service of our nation.
Yes,
absolutely in service of our nation. People forget the fear that they felt. I want people to go back to the 12th of September, 20 years ago or so, 25 years ago, that day after 9/11.
yes,
right? And everyone, there wasn't one person who wasn't reticent to go on a plane, wasn't reticent to, they'd see a plane fly over in the sky and think, what's going on? There was a lot of fear. And then after Bali, after London, after Barcelona, after Paris Bataclan, the fear increased. And these guys got sent in with our blessing to make the world a safer place. And somewhere along the line, we forgot. We forgot about them.
Oh, we did. And as they said, when I remember, listening to 9/11 and the night it happened, and as they said, our first responders, while people were running out, they were running in.
Yeah,
and
that's it.
Doesn't that stand your hairs up on your head? These these people are running in. When I hear their stories, and I listen to a lot of different podcasts, and you hear some of the ones who survived, knowing the ones who were going in knew they weren't coming out that day. And I don't know how many people can do that courage. You think you can, and so many people say, oh, I'll do this, I'll hurt someone if they hurt someone, but till you're there, you really don't know. And for them to run in when they know they weren't going to come in, that courage and that thought that they should be honoured for the rest of their lives, even with them not being here.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I've lived in New York, in downtown Manhattan, and when you walk past those fire stations with the 10 or 12 or more photos on the wall of the guys who ran into burning, collapsing buildings, and you just think, my God, incredible. And that's it, and then, in a cool light of day, in the weeks after 9/11, the SAS and other people from the ADF and the commandos, they then ran into the burning building of these war zones.
Yeah.
And like I said, somewhere along the line, we forgot that we sent them there.
Exactly. And when they were going there, it's basically they were doing the same as the first responders on 9/11. They were running into the building. These guys were, getting dropped into the country where they were going to get shot at, blown up, and killed. So they know where they were going, and they know what they were facing, and they didn't, turn back. They went forward.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it was just as dangerous. I think all Aussies should be reminded of the 3 young men who were shot in the back while on base.
Yeah.
Over in Afghanistan, shot in the back by a turncoat from, well, I won't go into it in details. People can look up that incident themselves.
Yes.
So it wasn't just the SAS and the commandos outside the wire. It was, everyday Aussie military guys and men and women inside the wire in base. It was still extraordinarily dangerous for all of them.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how the saying goes, but it's says the brave ones are the ones who are up all day and night. When we shut our eyes, the brave ones are up at night time. They're the ones who are awake, seeing the danger and going for the danger. We go to bed every night. You can do your social media, you can eat your hot meals, but you don't realize there's someone out there every night protecting you to allow you to live as safe as we do, especially in this country.
Yeah, but my grandfather told my dad, when my dad asked him about what it was like to be behind Japanese enemy lines, where if you were caught, you were tortured to death, literally tortured to death.
Oh, yeah.
And my grandfather told my dad, we were all scared all the time. That was the exact phrase. And you just think, and you got up and went into battle, into combat hundreds of times.
Yeah.
Not once or twice, but hundreds of times. You just think, yeah, we really do need to acknowledge the incredibly massive debt that living in a free, prosperous nation that has only been bought by the blood of these men and women.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I was listening to Horse with Gary, and I think Gary's, Gary yourself, and it was an excellent interview. And again, you hear the other work he has done now. He may not be part of the special forces, but I know he does a lot in, I think it's Africa. He's helped around the world serve in a civilian way to protect people. And people think that they're finished and they leave the army, but they don't understand they're still serving in some way, because it's not like they can finish and just go and get a easier job. They served so much for their country, and their respect for their country, their training is to protect people. And I think it's very hard for them to get that out of their system.
I agree with you. And one of the privileges, once again, of this tour and of this film is it's brought us into contact with the hundreds of everyday Aussies who volunteer their time down at their local RSL sub-branch. So these sub-branches, these are the ones where, former veterans or people who've served, they can get together and help each other out. And, I think of Barry and Dave and everyone at Bathurst RSL sub-branch, who are sort of there helping out their mates and helping out other veterans, or these 2 old guys, John and John at Moree sub-branch, and they run the most amazing little World War II military museum there in Moree. If you're driving through Moree, stop in and have a look at it. And John run this sub branch, and God, they'd both be well into their 80s. And once again, they have that sense of doing things bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
It's not just about yourself. It's not just chasing the status symbol or the brand name or whatever the heck you think impresses people. It's how you can give something back to your community. And these sub ranches, Collaroy is another one, just absolutely incredible people, right across Australia. They're just rippers, and they all served in their time, sometimes 60 or 70 years ago. We've got one fellow at Bathurst RSL sub branch called Garth, and he was in the New Zealand SAS, and he went behind enemy lines in Borneo back in the 1950s and early 60s. So just incredible people, and they still get out every day, even though they're in their 70s and 80s and older. And just kind of think, what can I do to help people? What can I do to teach kids about military history? Is there a veteran in my town who's not doing well and wouldn't, need some help with their medical bills? Or, maybe it's just a hot meal for them and a kind ear to listen to their story. So a lot of great Aussies out there, really are. Absolutely.
That's so true. And when I talk about horse, I don't want to disrespect anyone else in your documentary and not naming them. It's just I had listened to the horse's story a little bit more. So I mightn't be naming any others in your documentary, but you have named the total amount, and I have totally respect from that too. So when I do talk about that, I want them to know I've got total respect for that group of people too. And I think what you said about respect too, I remember when I used to go to school and we used to have the 11th or Anzac Day, and I'm not too sure it happens anymore. When that time came, the class stood up, and I'm not sure if schools do that anymore. And I think that's even starting at that small period at a time to teach kids the value and what it means. And I think we're lost that as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, and to get back to Horse, to see how he communicates with people every night. One of the most valuable things about this film and this tour is that after the film's done, Horse, there's a bit of a Q&A where people can ask Horse questions about serving in the SS, and there's some really, really great questions there. And then after that, people come up and they talk to him and they tell Horse their story, their struggles. And there's a lot of pain, especially in the emergency services community, police, ambos, fireys, nurses, and they say, this is my story because I had the bureaucracy. I had some, mealy manager target me and destroy me and push me to the edge of suicide. And every night Horse has the strength to hear those stories, and when he can help them. He gives, maybe it's a word of advice, maybe it's just listening to their story. And the same when we go to the pub every night afterwards and people sit around Horse, and, he's got a bit of the warrior poet to him. He's quite an incredible person, and he's on his own journey. If you listen to Gary Jubilan's podcast, I Catch Killers, you'll hear for like 3 hours of Horse's journey, and it's quite an amazing journey.
Yeah.
But, he still is giving in many, many ways in regards to his presence and his time and his wisdom. He's been to battle. Been to battle many, many times. He's risked his life many times, and he's done what a warrior has to do. But now he's come back to the tribe. He's come back to the community. He's bringing that wisdom back. And I see that also with people like Brigadier Dan Fortune. He's still the ex-SAS brigadier, and he still comes back to his tribe, back to his community, and what can he do to help? Burnsy's another one. He works with a charity called Heroes for Horses, and or Horses for Heroes. I always get that one wrong. And he does an amazing job, once more, giving back to the tribe. Massive, all these people, incredible what they do.
And as you said, that was a real amazing interview with Gary. And, again, we heard the stories. As I said, I hear he, helps people overseas still, and done charities overseas and have protected people overseas. And I know one of the stories he was talking about was when the helicopters were coming back and the Afghan soldiers jumped on his helicopters, and they kind of were looking at each other and telling him to get out, but they wouldn't. So they kind of backed away and waited for the next helicopter. What just shows the stories we don't hear. We just don't know what's going there. We see a quick flash on TV what might happen in Afghanistan, or soldiers have done this, but it's just not what's really happening behind the battlefield.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And it's it's not my place to get into any of these accusations or anything like that, as the guys themselves say it.
Yeah.
Put up or shut up. Put up the evidence, or shut up and wrap this up, because it's caused suicides.
Oh,
I think this is something that has not been reported. That these people who've won all this glory from throwing rocks at the ABC. Well, some of those rocks hit.
yes.
Some of those rocks have caused divorces. Some of those rocks have caused suicides. There's some chronic illnesses. People who I can tell one story of a guy who had quite a successful business, had no investigation, accusations on him at all. Really great business, really great human being. And the war crimes accusations, unfounded accusations came out. He had to wrap up his business pretty much. Couldn't get any more work because it was tied to the fact that he was a guy who had served in the SAS, so he could deliver. And it's enormously painful to see that. But to get back to horse, incredible, and I don't think it's a bad thing. We've all got lots of time. People can listen to Gary Jubilan's podcast, where Horse talks about exactly what you're talking about, Alan. His work anti-poaching in Africa, helping protect rhinos. Wow! Like, if you are going to turn your skills in combat and being able to use weapons and being able to understand what it means to use violence in an effective way for good, which is something that real men do and real women can do. They can use power and force for good to protect the innocent. In this case, innocent are rhinos, endangered animals. And Horse has gone there and risked his life in Africa to protect these animals, And that's Gary Jubilant. On his podcast, they talk about that. Also, Matty Morris's podcast, Zero Limits.
Yes.
Ex-ADF guy himself, absolutely great human being again, Matty Morris.
Yes.
And I think it's a 3.5-hour interview with Horse. So if you really want to understand the deep insight into what it means to be a warrior and what that really means, and the toll of that journey, but also the boon and the gift of that journey as well, then Matty Morris and Gary Jubilant's podcasts with Horse, really great place to start.
Yeah, and about the Gary one, he's got his own extraordinary story of where he came from too, and what he's been through, and I could see the connection there. Him serving as a police officer and seeing, extraordinarily awful things and emotional things he went through. And one thing what actually caught me in that podcast, what he said is, it's amazing when, and I don't want to go into politics as you said, but I call them the brass. When things were going good, the brass and that was saying, standing out in front and making sure they're in front of the microphone. But when it goes wrong, that they don't want that. They're not part of the story. They're not, you're carrying around the what do you call it? The trophies and everything, basically. But you're happy to have the trophy, but when it's time, you don't give it back. You just blame the ones underneath you.
Well, that's absolutely correct, Alan. And like I said, the hundreds of times we have had people come up to us over the past 7 months, fireys, police, we even had a professor, ADF people, and they've come up and they've talked about what Horse explains and uses the term administrative violence. It's where someone within a bureaucracy, they pretend to be holding other people to account, but they're just getting the thrill of power. They're just using power over someone who's better than them, who's someone who has the courage to be that cop at 3 a.m. in the morning going to a car crash, who has the bravery to be that nurse working a night shift, saving 3 or 4 lives in the one night, to be the SAS or the commando who runs towards the bullets, And then this bureaucrat, due to their insignificance, their own weakness, their own insecurity, they choose to target that person because it's the good old tall poppy. They can't do better because they don't have the guts of these Aussies. So the best they can do to make themselves feel good is rip that person down. And that administrative violence by these bureaucrats is far more damaging than the effect of going into combat for many of these people or going into the burning building. They do that because they love our nation and they're willing to lay down their life for their fellow person, their fellow human. They know that. They understand that. They don't pretend it's not traumatizing. Absolutely can be and is in its own way. But the real damage gets done by these bureaucrats, this administrative violence, tearing down good, brave Aussies. And that has to stop. And I think every Aussie in Australia knows this in their gut, that these kind of, ne'er-do-wells, these mealy people, they've got to stop this administrative violence. It cannot continue because it's damaging our good nation.
And sadly, these people, they'll stand behind people and they'll say things and they look for influences. So if, everyone's on side A, they have to be on side A. If they don't have, like I said, I don't want to go into politics, but they don't have the guts to stand out and say what they think or the truth. They have to stand behind someone else and agree with someone else because they don't want to stand out and actually speak the truth because they think they're going to get ripped down or not liked. And I think, that's the most gutless thing where you have to agree with others because you're too scared to talk the truth.
Absolutely. And that's its own form of wisdom and bravery. Sometimes being wise and brave is simply just having the humility to just listen to something before you go throwing rocks at somebody. Just listening, allow the truth to unfold in its own time and its own way. Because I used the term before, but some of these rocks that cowards threw at our bravest men, some of them cause suicides. A lot of them cause divorces,
Yeah. And I know, I won't go on to another soldier I know, but I think you hear stories, and I don't judge on any story, but you think, oh, okay, I think that's how it would work. That you sit down with these special forces people, the people who actually are in the front line in whichever frontline service you want to hear, and you hear the truth. Even some soldiers who have served over different parts of countries, Ukraine, or in this countries, Ukraine and things like that, and you think how it's going to work and how it can fix it, but then you talk to them and it's a wisdom of them seeing what's actually on ground. They talk to the people from that country. They actually in that story, and it's made me stand back and think, stop thinking so much. Stop thinking.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Ask questions, don't judge, ask questions, and the true people want to tell you what's going on out there. If you ask them the questions, don't judge them, tell them they're wrong, you'll hear a story and you'll walk away with so much more knowledge. And that's partly what I'm trying to do this podcast with.
Yeah, well, I think it's great, Alan, that your podcast is actually called A Conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like that. That's good.
Yeah. No, it's great. And so, moving on, it's been great talking and about this other movie, the documentary, I should say. Is it true it's going to be trying to move to the United States soon? And did I see some things that's going to have some movement over there?
Yeah, well, it is. So we're actually looking at getting into America, obviously, because the American pilots are a big part of the story. And their bravery is a big part of the story. But I think Americans are far more comfortable with being proud of their servicemen and women.
Yes.
And so I think it's a film that will have something to say to an audience over there. And also, hopefully, it'll be on streaming and DVD soon. So, if you want to be able to, at the moment, the only way you can watch this film is in the cinemas. So jump on wanderingwarrior.org and grab your ticket.
Yes.
They're going pretty fast. But, if you want to see it on a streaming service, write to them and get them along. Tell them to get this bloody film on. It may not be. It's definitely not what the media, normally have said about the war in Afghanistan. But my God, it's first-person testimony from the men and women who were there.
And Simon, as I said, as we get close to the end, I want to thank you for coming on. But as I said it, and you said thank you, but I want to, weird way to say thank you for your service of putting a documentary together. It takes a lot of emotions, and the stories you would have heard from the wives and the children, and just sitting there and hearing, Horse and the other people speak. You got to stay strong too over this time. Yes, they're going through it, but you still have to put this package together, manage a lot of people behind the scenes, and you would have to at times cover over your feelings when you were hearing the young children talk and that about their losing their parent. And it's not like you could break down in emotions, because you're kind of asking the questions and putting them together, and you've got to try to keep, it's like a counselor or a psychiatrist, to show no emotions and just show no bias and just listen to it.
Well, I did show emotion. I was always deeply, deeply touched. And it didn't matter whether it was one of the widows telling their story, or whether it was John Howard talking about his father's service, or Kevin Rudd. He had some amazing stories too, all of which were very emotional. But I wasn't managing a big team. The team really was only Emily Davis, who was the producer and same rank as me in regards to the production, and she did a huge workload. So it was really just the two of us going around Australia making the film. I'm not kidding you. And then we had some amazing camera people and sound people, Will Brinkat, Paul Gordon, Sean Safai, just awesome people, John Benner over in America. So it wasn't a big team. And I think there's an interesting story there about, I mentioned it earlier, just get it done. It's the old Aussie practicality. But I wasn't managing a huge team. If anything, Emily Davis, our producer, was keeping the wheels on this thing. So, and we were a team of two. We really were. Dr. Hutchinson, he ran the studio over in Perth, did a bloody good job. So, yeah.
Maybe not a big team, but still, you still put it together, and I can see who you are. You're giving all them honours to other people who deserve it. But I want to honour the stuff you did. So, you need to as well accept the honour of people saying thank you to you. You're thanking the small people around you, but I think one thing, not saying you got to learn, but you got to accept that you did the hard work too, and people got to thank you for putting it together.
Thank you, Alan. But if I end this podcast thanking anybody, I think it's David and Mary McCarthy. I think they should go down as true bloody Aussie heroes, and they should be the names on the tip of people's tongues for when they think of heroism and service, as in addition to the commandos, the SAS, and everyone else. But anyway, Alan, it's been I've really enjoyed this conversation. You've asked some very smart questions, and helped us get the message, the deeper message about this film out there. So huge thanks, Alan. Really, really a good experience.
Oh, thanks. And just quick 2 questions to finish off. One, the 2 people you're talking about, I think if we can be put in contact with them, I would love to have them on the podcast. And we're talking, I don't think you don't mind me to say this, that there could be a possible Horse coming on my podcast too because of you. So I want to thank you for that.
No, Alan, all good.
And I want you to thank you, and I thank for your words about how the interview's gone and taking your time, because it took a little bit of a connection issues tonight. But again, I want to thank everyone in your documentary for their service, and even a small podcast like this, if I can allow people to know about the documentary and the service everyone in that documentary has gave, and the families, just a small thank you to them from myself. And thank you for everyone's service.
No worries. Huge thanks, Alan. Appreciate it. And last words would be, go and have a look at Bravery and Betrayal. Go and watch the film. It's good stuff.
We'll have all
Thanks,
them.
Alan.
We'll have all them links there as well. Thanks, Simon.
No worries. Bye.